Welcome to Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods. I'm your host, Corey Nathan. This is where we get to speak with the brilliant and creative people who make the greatest truly, the greatest coming attractions, movie posters, and digital campaigns of all time. And on these sets of episodes that we're doing this summer, it really is of all time. And you'll see what I mean. If you haven't listened to the initial installment of our tribute to Andy Kuehn, the one where Benedict Coulter was the co-host and Skip Chassan of Skip Film joined us. Man, it was just fantastic. I'm so excited to be doing this series, all as a tribute to Andy Kuehn. Before we get started, I need to share with you, I'm so grateful to our sponsors. We are brought to you by 2496 Sound and Music Design, the best sound design and music elements in the business. We are also brought to you by the Golden Trailer Awards. Love me some Monica and Evelyn. And we are brought to you by Soundstripe, the best royalty-free music for video, ads, and film. And today, as mentioned, we are continuing our tribute to Andy Kuehn. I think of him, and I think it's fair to say that he is the father of the modern trailer industry. It's such a great way to give him the credit that he deserves. Passed away about 20 years ago, so we never got to interview him on this program. So it's just terrific to be bringing back. Number one, Benedict is co-hosting, which is so awesome. Benny was arguably the first rock star editor of the trailer business. He started out at Kaleidoscope and was mentored by Andy. He is currently the owner. Many folks know him. He's the owner of Rebel, or co-owner, I should say, of Rebel. And I just love Benny's contribution. It was his idea to do this. And man, there's such warmth that you could feel with everybody that's recorded with this, a tribute to Andy so far. And this is no exception. This one, we're joined by Mike Camp. Mike started out, as you'll hear, at Kaleidoscope. He shares some of his story, but real quick, Mike has such an interesting trajectory because he came up at Kaleidoscope before going to Paramount. He was a longtime creative executive at a very high level, EVP over there. He spent a little bit of time back on the agency side after his time at Paramount, but then he went to Fox on the international side as an EVP. And then all that before owning his own shop. He was a partner at ACME. And it was just great to hear Mike, especially with Mike and Benny on the same. We were all together, so it was really terrific to just hear again their fond memories of Andy, to hear their experiences, their shared experiences. What a treat! What a treat! I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So without further ado, here is Mike Camp with co-host Benedict Coulter in our ongoing tribute to Andy Kuehn. All right. So cool to be joined by Mike Camp and Benny, my partner in crime. Good to see you again, Benny. Thanks for dropping in.
Good to see you, Corey.
As always, as always. Mike, folks, you have so many friends in the industry, so many of the folks that you worked with back at the Kaleidoscope as a client at Paramount and then Fox and different stops along the way, most recently at ACME. There's a lot of folks who still think fondly of you, but a lot of folks in the industry don't know about you. So I'd love for you to share with everybody. First of all, thanks for coming in and doing this at our tribute to Andy Kuehn.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, but give us the 30-second intro to all things Mike Camp.
Well, I started at Kaleidoscope. That was my I came out after college, after graduating Carnegie Mellon. I came out and I was trying to get into production. I wanted to be a cinematographer, but you couldn't get into the union in those days unless you were related to somebody that was already there. So I hung lights, I did production, and did a bunch of stuff, but I got tired very soon of getting calls at 4 o'clock in the morning saying, be at Warner Hollywood at 5:30. And like, So Bob Harper, who we had gone to college together, he was working at Kaleidoscope. He had started there as a PA, and he said, there's another PA job open if you want to come in and interview. So I went in and I met with Bruce Bellatz, who was running the messenger department at the time, and then Vince, who was his overseer, And then I got called back to meet with Andy and Steve. And I got the job and, started as a PA doing coding and all kinds of junk work and getting lunches and going to the bank and making deposits and all that kind of stuff.
So
And
just so we know the timeline here, was this before Benny? Was this before you or Mike?
no,
Did you
Benny
come?
was already there. Benny had just, I think you had just like moved up to being an assistant at that time.
Yeah, I
Um,
started in March 77.
yeah, and this I started in I think October of 79.
Wow.
So
I
yeah,
forgot the
so
whole Carnegie Mellon part and Bob Hart. Yeah, that you went to school with Bob Harper.
yeah, yeah. We were both theater majors at Carnegie. He graduated a year ahead of me, so he came out, and then I graduated and came out the year after him.
Right.
And so yeah, so I started and worked my way up through the ranks of, you start as an apprentice, you start as a PA doing all the grunt work. You then you latch on eventually to becoming an apprentice editor. And this was all obviously in those days film. We were cutting film. Kaleidoscope was very big in those days, besides trailers, doing behind the scenes. I mean, Vince ran a whole crew, almost a full-time crew doing 16 millimeters. So we had like 6 or 7 different 16 millimeter flatbeds, and we were constantly doing behind the scenes stuff. They would go out and shoot. They had their own camera and all kinds of equipment and stuff, and would go onto the sets and shoot 16 millimeter behind the scenes. And we would cut all that stuff together. So you were handling 16 and 35. You learned how to be a projectionist. I can still run film.
Wow.
So it's always a good skill to have if shit doesn't work out. You can maybe get a job at the AMC down the street. Um, and I just I worked at Kaleidoscope from 79 to 86, working my way up. I became an assistant after a couple of years to Bill Cox, who was the senior editor at Kaleidoscope and basically the guy who trained everybody.
Hmm.
Benny worked for him for a while, and I worked for him. He had the Kaleidoscope was we were on Seward Street, and it was a long, it was this long building and with a center hall and offices on both sides, and then there was a big room at the very back on the first floor, and that was Bill's room, and he had a door that went outside, so that was like a popular room because everybody could go outside and smoke, pot, do, all kinds of stuff. So everybody liked to come and hang out in Bill's room. And also Bill liked to listen to sports and he played the ponies. And that was a big thing at Kaleidoscope in those days. There was a lot of gambling on horse racing and stuff. Uh,
Excursions down to Hollywood Park.
well, yeah, Andy and Steve and Mike Shapiro, who ran Saraband, which was like a sister company, um, they had this guy who worked for them as a handyman, Charles Crittenden. He's a very tall black guy with a big cowboy hat. And Charles would always go around and collect, and he'd have the racing for him, and he'd go around and collect the bets. And
Oh
then he'd
wow.
go down at lunchtime and post all the bets. And then we would sit around in the afternoon and listen to the races. Now, when the race is coming around, and we'd all be like, oh, you're going to win. So
Oh
it
man,
was,
I didn't know that. This is news to me.
Yeah, but they also had the gambling in the room with dice and cards. Remember,
yeah,
Mike? I mean, they like
every
that was
Thursday
also while
night,
they were listening to the horses, they were also
yeah,
It's
every
funny.
Thursday night, there was a big crap game.
Uh,
yes.
And everybody would, there was somebody had this like little box, that was this tall and about this long, and it had a crap table. And so everybody would put bets down on crap, and everybody would roll dice and stuff and play craps. And this went on for years until one night, and it got pretty crazy at times. I mean, like, there were a couple $100 going back and forth and everything. And one night, Vince and Charles really got into it because
oh
Vince
wow.
was a big guy, big in gambling and stuff. And they really got into it. And they went until like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and Charles lost over $1,000.
Oh
And
wow.
at that point, it was like, okay, but it was cut off at that point. No
Yeah.
more gambling. So unfortunately,
And lots of drinking. We used to have to go and get the, 6 and 12 packs of beers for Bill and Todd, the two older guys who were like,
Yeah.
ran those rooms and a lot of drinking.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, I mean, uh, you have to think about, I mean, things were very different in those days. This was the real middle part of the crazy Hollywood years where drugs came to town. I mean, I was never a big druggie. I didn't like drugs. I alcohol was fine for me. But there was a lot of drugs. I mean, you could go into the restroom and the back of the toilet tank would just be covered in drugs.
Oh God.
And it was crazy. When I first started there, because I was from Pennsylvania, I was like naive. And when I first started there and I was running around and running errands and stuff, and it would be like, you'd get called into, the office by one of the assistants and they'd say, here, take this package. And it would be like wrapped up, like this. And take this package over to this guy's address, and you get an address, and he's going to give you something. Bring it straight back to me, not to anybody else. Don't. It's like, okay. And you go over, and it would be somebody's house, and the guy would like go in the back, and he would come back out, and he would have this like little manila package, all wrapped up and everything, and he would be like real suspicious and everything. And I'm like, going like, what kind of cassette is this? Why are they wrapping these tapes up in brown paper and shit? What is it? And then you realize after a while, it's like, wow, I just did a drug run.
That's funny. If Tarantino does another film, this is going to be the film. This is what it's going to be about.
Oh, it's believe me. And then, there were always people coming in and out. There was people coming in and going out. And there was this guy who came. He would always stop by like 3 or 4 times a week on a motorcycle. He had this big chopper, and he would come in, and he would come in and he would wander up and down the hallways, and I would always be like, is this guy a client? What is it? Why is this guy always like, he's somebody's friend, obviously, but why is he here like all this time? And he was the local drug dealer.
Yeah, Robert.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods is brought to you by Soundstripe. So if you're an editor, a producer, a creative exec, a music supervisor, or even a podcaster like me, if you're a content creator of all stripes, if you will, and you're looking for the perfect library of music and sound effects, check out Soundstripe. With over 10,000 high-quality tracks, including music from Grammy-winning artists, Soundstripe makes music licensing hassle-free. Believe me, I've tried it. I've been on there. I've navigated around. It was really terrific. It was really easy to use. So with a simple subscription, you get unlimited access to a vast catalog, downloadable stems for creative flexibility, and AI song editing to customize tracks effortlessly. Plus, there's seamless integration with Premiere, which is what most of my editor friends are on. It means a smoother editing experience. If you're ready to level up your production game with properly licensed, high-quality music and sound effects, head over to soundstripe.com/trailergeeks and save 10% with code TRAILERGEEKS. That's soundstripe.com/trailergeeks and code TRAILERGEEKS. All right, so you know what? I'm going to have you back because I realize that the rest of your career, we need to just devote, a solid hour to, because just so folks know, I'll give the top lines. Mike was an EVP at Paramount, spent a little bit of time back at Kaleidoscope, right?
Yes. Well, yeah, I did creative advertising at Paramount. I left Kaleidoscope in '86, went to Paramount,
Good
worked
run
my
there
way
too,
up.
right?
What's that?
A good run there.
Oh yeah, we had a great run. I mean, we finished the spots on Top Gun on Friday, and I delivered them to myself on Monday.
Oh,
So my first
I
year
hear the
at
editor on that
Paramount,
trailer was pretty good too, right?
yeah, he was okay.
It was decent.
My first year at Paramount, 1986, was Top Gun, Ferris Bueller, Summer School,
Oh, wow.
uh, uh, Crocodile Dundee, and Star Trek 4.
Oh,
We had 5 of the top 10 movies that year, and then the
amazing.
next year was The Untouchables, Fatal Attraction.
Oh, wow.
We had a great run. We
Yeah.
had, yeah, and the movie business was so different in those days
Those are
because
the
the
glory days of
corporation,
Paramount.
we were a movie studio. We were not a corporation. We made movies and we owned 100% of the movies and we owned 100% of the success and 100% of the failure. And we made a lot of good movies. We made some bad movies. And Ned Tannen, who ran production at that time, and Frank Mancuso, who was the head of the studio, they understood how to build a variety of movies to appeal to different people. And Ned used to say that it's the Top Guns and the Ferris Buellers that pay for the children's of a lesser god.
Mm.
It's also 86. I forgot about that one.
So I'm going to
Um,
pause you right there because I'm realizing we really do need to spend. I need to have you back just as a solo guest, and we're going to do your whole trajectory. But I want to rewind a little bit here. I am so curious what your first impression of, as a kid straight out of Pennsylvania, Carnegie Mellon, what your first impression of Andy Kuehn was.
I thought he was a movie star. I mean, Andy was, Andy was a great character. We'll talk about all of his accomplishments. I mean, he created the modern trailer.
Yeah,
He ran MGM advertising for years. Night of the Iguana was the first modern trailer. So I'm sure he talked about that with everybody. But he was also a character, and he was, as a human being, he was beautiful. He was just like this. He had this slick back hair, this mustache. I mean, he was very much an old-fashioned Clark Gable kind of movie star guy. He had this great voice, and he would talk to you. He's like, Mike, I think you've got a good future in this business. And you just were like sucked in by Andy because he he had this incredible, warmth and charm, and you just were like, yeah, I'll do whatever you tell me to do.
wow,
He was, he obviously had said, and I had no, when I first heard about Kaleidoscope, I was like a lot of people in those days, trailers, what's that? Yeah, I had no idea what a trailer company did and what it was. And Bob was telling me about, the kind of stuff that was done. And I thought, oh, well, this sounds interesting because I can learn editing and post-production and marketing and studio relations all at the same time. It was
right,
like this weird combination of stuff, which really became my career to have a background in editing and understand how trailers are put together and then be able to go and produce them at the studio side. It made me a much more, empathetic and understanding. There are so many clients, and you can cut me when I go on rants, but there's so many clients, in the last 10 years and stuff that have no background in any of this. They don't know how to edit. They don't know how to do any of the work itself. And so they have no understanding of, well, put this shot and that shot together. It's like, well, they don't go together. They
right.
don't make any sense together, we learned how to make things work together. And we did it on film. We learned how motion worked together. And Andy used to talk about, he had all different descriptions of how, of what a trailer was, but one of his big, you know, points of view about it was that a trailer was a song. It gave you an emotion. It gave you a feeling because we're not selling shoes. I mean, we're selling, if you look at big time advertising like Nike, Nike doesn't make commercials where they tell you the bottom ridge of the sole is double pleated, which makes it a much more. They're not selling the shoe. They're selling an experience and a
Mm,
feeling. Just do it. Go out there. Be the best you can be. It's like you wouldn't even know that they have their shoes on, but
yeah,
they're selling you a sense of, wow, I want to be like that. I want to dress like that. I want to wear Nike shoes because then I'll feel like I'm a great athlete. A trailer does that too. A trailer is a piece of music and it's designed to give you an emotion. That's what we're trying to do is we're trying to give you a sense of what this story is and what kind of an emotion you're going to have from it. So you go, oh, I like that. I want more of that. And Andy, really believed in that. That's why music was such an important thing, and Benny became one of the best at using music and really pushing the boundaries of how you could use music and how important music was to establish what you're trying to do, because you've only got 90 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever you have. You really have to set the tone quickly. And music does that. You hear the first couple of notes of something and it already sets you in a certain mood. And now you can start to play with that. Now you can start to lead people along. The other thing that Andy would talk about was, how to use stars. And he used to say, you got to use your stars, like you're in a poker game, Streisand, she's an ace, so you got to roll her out slowly. So, we were always looking for the ways to bring that star in a reveal, or bring them in a dramatic moment, bring them in a way that you go like, get them hooked on the movie. And oh, by the way, Harrison Ford's in it too. Holy crap. So use those people, get them hooked first, and then lay those extra cards on top so that you're escalating and going like, wow, this is something I really want to see.
Yeah. Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods is brought to you by 2496 Sound and Music. 2496 Sound and Music has been publishing music and sound design in Hollywood for over 2 decades. While most traditional libraries started with music first, 2496 started from the ground up, creating killer sound design elements for trailers and film campaigns. Then they started building a music catalog which matches the sound design catalog perfectly, creating a powerful blend of sound, music, and emotion. Their founder, Lenny Jones, who's a pal of mine, really good guy, he is a motion picture and television sound editor with credits on top shows including Ancient Aliens and Unsolved Mysteries. 2496's sound design can be heard on current trailer campaigns, including many of the summer's box office hits. 2496's composers and sound designers hail from all over the globe, giving their clients not just 24/7 service, but an international style that will appeal to a global audience. They excel at rapid customizations and creative revisions, minimizing delays in your creative process. If you're looking for the sound of the next for your next trailer campaign, check out 2496 Sound and Music at 2496sfx.com. That's the numbers 2496 and SFX like sound effects. That's 2496sfx.com. The other thing that's interesting about both of you fellas, Benny and Mike, is you went on to run companies, but also start companies. So you started, Mike, you started a Acme. Or wait, it wasn't Acme at first, was it?
Yeah.
Oh, it was Acme. It just had a couple of different iterations.
Yeah,
Right?
we spent a long time trying to come up with a name, and we would have breakfast at the Talleyrand in Burbank, and we would sit around and try to come up with names, because some of the names are and at one point we were like, we should just call it Acme Trailer Company or something. And I was looking up name when we would come out with a name. I would look it up and see if like the URL, if Acme was available as. And so we would type in like, well, let's call it Cloudflare, and we go, look, no, that's taken. You can't use that. Okay, well, what about? And then somebody said Acme, and I looked it up and I said, well, it's available. We can do it. And so we just said, yeah, screw it. We'll call it Acme Trailer Company.
Well, for purposes of this conversation, I'm curious how Andy's entrepreneurship influenced you when you found yourself at that chapter of your career, starting a company, being an enterprising businessman.
It was frightening because part of what happens with a lot of these companies is that you start, everybody takes, a little bit of money. You try to keep all your costs down. You do everything. I mean, my partners were editors, and then I did everything else. I did all the books. I did all the payroll. I did, I mean, I did everything. I painted the walls. I did anything and everything that needed to be done. I did. I built the servers. I learned how to do
Wow.
Mac server software. I mean, I learned everything. I learned how to build a SAN. I learned how to do all of this stuff. And they cut, and I did everything else. And you have this period where you're growing and you're trying to get things going and everything's touch and go, and then you start to get a couple of things going and you get on a run and everything blows up and it's like goes crazy. And then you sort of hit a plateau of like, okay, well now this is how much business we can do and how much we're gonna do. And then your costs start doing this. And eventually they do that,
You start
which,
outpacing
is
your
ultimately
billings.
what
Yeah.
happened at Kaleidoscope. It
Yeah.
got to be to the point where the costs were bigger than what we could bill.
Yeah.
And eventually, it's very hard to maintain a company, even over a period of time like Kaleidoscope had. And it becomes very difficult. So starting a company it's a real roll of the dice, and it's frightening. It's,
Yeah.
I mean, it's, I of our group, everybody put in a little bit of money, but most of the money came from me. And so I
Mm.
was the one who had everything at risk. And so that's frightening. When you when you drop a big chunk of change into a company, you have no idea how it's going to work. But yeah, I tried to take everything I learned from Andy and Steve and all of those guys and everybody I'd ever worked with, and figure out the best way to do any of it,
Yeah.
because it's a hard thing. Running one of these little companies is hard, and they're totally service based, and you're at the mercy of the studios who, in the Kaleidoscope days, Kaleidoscope had all the power. We had the talent. You want a good trailer? You come to Kaleidoscope. You want a piece of crap trailer? Go down the street. There's a company down the street, that'll do it for less money. You want to come to Kaleidoscope? You're going to pay top dollar, and you're going to get the best talent. You're going to get Andy. You're going to get Steve. You're going to get the best editors. And all of the big movies came to Kaleidoscope, except for a few movies, particularly ones that were based out of New York filmmakers would go to Canoe Manger Gorge.
Right. Right. Right.
And those were the two. You either, if you were a big movie or a big filmmaker, you either went to Kaleidoscope or you went to Canoe Manger Gorge. And there were no other, there were a lot of other little companies, but we were when you hired Kaleidoscope, you hired Kaleidoscope. There was nobody else working on a movie. We didn't there was no, there were no multiple vendors. There was none of that kind of stuff. And you were the partner to the studio, and the studios respected Andy and Steve and respected Kaleidoscope and respected the work and knew the quality of the work that was coming out of the company. And so you were a part of that. And also because we were cutting on film and everything. I mean, we talked about at the beginning the crazy stuff, but we had time.
Mm.
You weren't, I mean, nowadays, if you're an editor, you're expected to be sitting at a computer 12 hours a day cutting.
Yeah.
You should be cutting all the time. If you're not cutting, you're not doing anything. You're useless. We had time because everything was done on film. So it took time to get a copy of the film because they had to duplicate the film from one piece of emulsion to another. And then we would get that, and then we would say that was our master. So we would then send that down to a little company called Ashfield, and they would make a black and white copy of that film, and we would use that to cut with because we didn't want to mess with the original, because every time you went down a generation, the image became tougher to see. And you had to, when you got that, you had picture and you had track. So you had to code them. So we had these machines that inked every foot a number, and you would run it through this coding machine from the start, and it would mark every foot. And you would do that on the picture, and then you would do that on the sound so that you could match the two numbers together to know that they were in sync. Well, that took, a few hours to do that. So you were waiting for that to happen. Then you would cut, and it would take time to cut. And so while you were, and then you would say, you know what, I might want to play around with these two scenes, so I'm going to send this out and get another dupe of it. Well, you would send that down to Ashland, and that would take a day. So there was a lot of downtime and a lot of time where you know, got to think. You got
Mm.
to think about what you were doing and walk around and talk to other people and say, you know, I got this thing that I was doing. Or you would go and sit in the back and listen to music. You could listen to music for hours trying to find the right piece of music. And you had the time to do that. You had the time to go into Andy's office and sit and chit chat. Andy had, you know, he had these little Friday afternoon get-togethers where we would, you know, people would start to filter in because Fridays, you know, the studio people would start to go home and the deadlines were not crazy then. So we would go in and everybody would hang out and Andy would have the wine out and he would be, you know, talking and pontificating about, when I was working with Streisand and where, and he would tell these stories and we were all sitting around and we were rapt listening to these stories. And he was like, you know, and I told Stanley Kubrick, you can't do that. And he would tell all these great, you know, stories and stuff and about all the stuff that was happening. And I'll tell you, this is one of the greatest lines of all of my career at Kaleidoscope. You'll probably remember this, Benedict, was we were sitting around one Friday afternoon and McClatchy was in there and Andy said, you know, he looked around the room and we were all like, you know, we're all basically young, like, you know, go-getters and wanting to be in the film business. And, you know, he looked around and he said, you know, I look at Kaleidoscope and I think it's, you know, it's like a college, you know, it's like a separate university. You come to Kaleidoscope, you know, and you learn the business and you learn all about editing. And there was this like look around the room and McClatchy said, yeah, I'm just glad my parents can afford to send me here.
That's hilarious. Did you stay in touch with Andy? Like, because you had another run at Kaleidoscope,
Yeah, I
but
went
then
back to
that.
Kaleidoscope after Paramount. Mark Trugman and Steve had a falling out. Trugman left and went to Aspect, and I was at that time in a production deal at Paramount. I had gotten, you know, at the end of all of my advertising and after Forrest Gump, I had a lot of leverage, and I finally got my production deal. Sadly, right as Viacom had taken over. Uh, you know, there was Paramount was going to merge with Viacom and
Mm,
become this giant company. And Martin Davis, who ran Paramount at the time, and Stanley Jaffe was the president. And they had worked out this deal with Redstone, and they were going to combine the companies. And Stanley was going to be president of the whole company, and Davis was going to be chairman, and Redstone was just going to be sort of sitting in the back, being sort of chairman emeritus of the whole thing. And then Barry Diller came in and said, nah, and started bidding for the company. And so it
okay.
became a battle for control. And in the end, Redstone couldn't fend Barry off. Uh, as an aside, all of us who had stock options were rooting for Barry
No.
um, because the price of the stock was going like, you know, it was like $100 a share. No, I'll give you 120 a share. And we're going like, go, go.
Wow.
So finally, Redstone bought Blockbuster Video in order to get, because Blockbuster was sitting on hordes of cash. You know, Blockbuster was a cash machine in those days, and they were sitting on billions of dollars of cash. So he bought Blockbuster to get the cash, and he made an all cash deal. But that forced out Davis and Stanley Jaffe. Stanley just passed away a month or so ago. We just had a
Oh,
memorial
wow.
service for him at the studio last week, actually. Um, and so they were pushed out, and Redstone took over, brought in Jonathan Dolgen, who created the House of Pain. And unfortunately, Paramount, that's when Paramount really shifted.
Mm.
it used to be that having a production housekeeping deal was the best thing you could possibly have because you were a studio producer. They assigned movies to you. You jumped in on movies all the time. Under Viacom, you had to bring money to the table or else you were getting nothing made. So I was sitting around, unable to get anything going. And Andy and Steve called up one day and said, "Hey, let's go to dinner." Okay. And they told me that Trugman was leaving and said, would you be interested in coming back? And, I was sorry to leave that aspect, the producing aspect, but I had two young kids. And I said, yeah, okay. And I came back, and that's, Skip was there and Paul Rollins, and it was a great group. And then we took off and had a really tremendous run, including Titanic, which we worked on for 4 years. And that was, from before he started shooting until, the international video release.
Yeah.
It was, we had a great run. And that's when Skip really, you know, really came into his own.
Yeah.
He had these unbelievable ideas and would do all this incredible stuff and everything. And then I just started, teaching him a little bit about story and, he'd do this and do this and this. And he just, he was so inventive and he took off. And it was great because, Benny had become that person at Kaleidoscope. Benny had become the guy who was the forward thinking, trying new things. I mean, the teaser, I looked at this the other day. It was interesting. I looked at Purple Rain.
Oh, wow. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it was such a great piece. And it was one of the earliest pieces of just really fast cutting on the beat. And you look back at that and you go like, wow, and you forget that was all cut on film. Those were 2-frame, 3-frame pieces that were all cut on film. It's easy to do on digital nowadays, but cutting those little tiny pieces on film and hitting those beats and everything.
Benny, how do you even approach, did you storyboard that out before you started actually cutting film?
No, I've talked about it with somebody. It all kind of came as I was cutting, so I was never able to do a paper cut for somebody because the inspiration came as I was cutting along, that when
Mm.
another idea would come along. And I remember, I don't know if I'd seen something somewhere where at the Purple Rain, they basically were two shot melding into each other in different direction. I thought, wow, that'd be really cool if I can put those two shots and they kind of like seem like they're dissolving into each other. But that took 2-frame cuts. And because it was on film, I had to splice 2 frames, 2 frames, 2 frames. And every time it ran through the gates of the movie, I said, oh man, I hope it doesn't rip because there were so many splices. But it
Yeah,
worked great. It was just interesting. So it was different, and uh, to kind of add on what Mike was saying about Skip, Skip, and I think that was the time, maybe around the time you went back, Mike, after Titanic. When he did Gone in 60 Seconds, all of us were like, "What the hell is
yeah,
this?" And he got a woman narrator, which I had been trying for years to get a female narrator, and the way he presented, I remember at the Kier Awards, I remember him walking off the building after the show, and he had like 8 awards, and he said he won everything.
yeah,
And he invented the next step.
yeah.
Combination of graphics and music choices, and it was just unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, he really took things to the next level. And when I got back there, one of the first things you do is you go around and you meet her. I knew Rick Goldstein, I knew Paul, I knew most of the people who were there. I didn't know Skip very well. Steve and Andy had just told me, well, we got this young kid, he had come from, a stock footage house. And that's where he was like putting together visual effects clips and stuff and all kinds of stuff. And so and when I met him, he was very shy and very quiet. Oh, Mr. Camp, thank you. I
Still
said,
is.
stop calling me. Yeah,
Still
stop
is.
calling me
Still very
Mr.
humble.
Yeah. And he And it was, he had done Braveheart, which was a pretty, standard trailer and everything. And we got the Truman Show. Uh, Aspect had been working on it and was, struggling. It was a difficult movie. And Nancy Gallagher came and said, would you guys take a shot at this? So I gave it to Skip and we worked on it really closely and put together a bunch of stuff and used Enter the Dragon, which, was we had used Benny, we
Forrest
had
Gump.
found in Forrest Gump and became a great score for a lot of different things, but we used that for the back end of it to get the emotion and everything. And Skip knew Enter the Dragon because he's a, massive Bruce Lee crazed person. Um, and that, and we did some graphics for it and everything. And it was kind of cool. But he would start to show me things that he was working on, like little, and he was sitting at the Avid. He would have a video running, usually like MTV and stuff. He would have a comic book and he would have like 5 or 6 things going all at the same time. And he would be playing with stuff and he would show me these little graphics and weird stuff. And he would say, I was trying to do this. And I said, oh, that's pretty cool. Maybe we'll find a place for that. We did this movie called U-Turn. It was an Oliver Stone movie. It's a
Oh
horror
yeah, I
movie.
remember it. Jennifer
And it
Lopez,
was, yeah, it was Jennifer Lopez and Nick Nolte, and or Sean Penn
Sean
and
Penn.
Nick
Yeah.
Nolte was it. And it was it was like Oliver Stone on drugs, which is sort of normal for Oliver Stone, but it was this weird ass movie, and it had all these like weird cuts, and it was what he had done in God, what was the name of that movie? See, I'm getting old now, I can't remember anything.
Oh,
Uh,
Natural Born
Natural
Killers.
Born Killers. He'd
Yeah,
taken that to the next step.
yeah.
And it was like, you know what? This is perfect. Skip, come here. Look at this. Let's look at this movie. This is perfect to try some of this stuff. So we did all these weird cuts and he did all these flipping signs and all kinds of stuff. And the movie was called U-Turn. So we built a graphic of the U-Turn sign. And then we had all these signs that we used as copy in the thing. And we did all this crazy stuff. And that got really cool. And then from that, it was like the next step became, and he still owes me the 20. I bet Ron Moeller that I was going to get Bruckheimer and Ridley and Tony back because Benny had taken them to Aspect when he went. I said, I'm going to get him back because now I knew I had a guy who could do it. And so I bet Ron $20. He's never paid me to this day, but I finally got Jerry to give us uh, the Will Smith movie. What was that called? See, I have to depend on you to think of these things, but it was the Will Smith and Gene Hackman, and it was about all these satellites and everything. And I said, Skip is the guy to do this, and we got it, and went down to the cutting room, introduced him to everybody, introduced him to Tony. Chris Levinson was there. Chris had worked on Top Gun. I mean, I knew Chris and Billy Weber and all those guys, all of Tony and Ridley's and Jerry's guys. And that was the beginning of it. That was when we started to experiment with really crazy graphics and stuff. And Tony just went berserk and was like, yeah, mate, got to get more of that, more of that, more of that. Just kept putting more and more stuff in, and it just got crazier and crazier. And then he was like, he came over and he was like, look, mate, I need you guys to do the graphics for the movie. So we ended up doing all the graphics in the movie, all the satellite stuff, all this weird stuff of the agency watching Will Smith and tracking him and everything. All that stuff, Kaleidoscope did. Skip designed it, and then we executed. And that was the beginning of when he really started pushing the envelope. And then the next was Gone in 60 Seconds. And when he showed me what he wanted to do, that he wanted to like start it and then reverse back out of the whole thing, I said, if you can pull that off, man, this is going to be awesome. And he went in and he took 3 days and played around with it. And the first cut, it was crude, but it was like, this is unbelievable. They're gonna have a heart attack when they see this. This is gonna be so great. And it was just a completely different way of looking at things. But again, it comes back to the very beginning. It created an emotion, it created a feeling.
Mm,
You instantly got, what's this movie going to be like? It's going to be a crazy thrill ride. And that's, that was the whole point is like, okay, I like that. I want more of that.
right,
Here's my
right.
ticket money. I'm in.
Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods is brought to you by the Golden Trailer Awards. For folks who are just starting to get plugged in, the GTAs is an unconventional ceremony that honors excellence in feature film trailers, teasers, and movie marketing. Or as some folks like to think of it, it's the award ceremony for the short attention span. We all just celebrated the 25th Golden Trailer Awards. So would that be the Silver Golden Trailer Awards? Either way, it was a terrific show. Monica and Evie do such a wonderful job putting it together. Tons of fun, so much awesome work across the board. And mostly, it was just great to be together as a community. So keep an eye out for a number of exciting developments over the next year. Just make sure to stay plugged in at goldentrailer.com for a ton of exciting developments. That's goldentrailer.com.
Kaleidoscope and Andy, for that matter, had started creating this with Taxi Driver and Jaws and all these epic, classic trailers
French
that we
Connection.
all learn from.
Yeah. French Connection, Sting. I'm trying to think what was like like the early days of modern trailers. But
Superman, the original Superman. We became good friends with Richard Donner. Uh,
Grand Prix
you know,
was one of his classic because there was some cool
yeah,
classic stuff in there. There was just really, he was very inventive. And I personally feel that all of us, and I know Skip feels the same way, we're all got inspired by Andy.
yeah,
He championed us and he inspired us. And he never limited us saying, well, I don't know about this. He said, absolutely, try it. I would run crazy ideas by him and he said, sure, that's great. Let's do this.
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Which is, Mike and I having owned companies, we knew that later on, I wanted to replicate that with the people who worked for me. Like, okay, let them fly. There's no bad ideas here because that's what I got from Andy.
Mm.
yeah, exactly. And you were always encouraged to try something new and different because the worst thing that could happen is it doesn't work.
And
But
Steve would tell you if it didn't work. Steve would be the one who would be like,
yeah,
I don't understand this line. He'd be like, we
I don't
were
get
all
it.
eyes. But he was right. Also, Steve was kind of like, he was the voice of reason. When we would really go on a crazy tangent, you go, this is a little too weird and doesn't make sense. And it might test well in New York, San Francisco, and LA. But in middle America, they're not gonna get this.
Mm.
So we need and I always battled with Steve with that creativity. Andy always let me fly, and Steve would bring me back, but he was also a really important factor in putting the pieces together.
Yeah, yeah,
You know what occurs to me is now there's so many great producer editor relationships in the trailer business, but when Andy was starting, there wasn't any producer editor. Like he, you know what I mean? Like Andy and Steve, they sort of invented that relationship. As I hear Mike, as I hear you talking about how you and Benny collaborated, and then eventually how you and Skip collaborated. Like, was that something? Were you sort of duplicating? What you saw Andy, how the way that you
yeah.
saw
I mean, when I went back, the deal that I sort of made was if I'm going to come back, you know, I just want to produce and create. I don't want to do the other crap stuff.
yeah,
Now it's difficult, but Steve was really he was great, and then there were times when he was not great at it. But Steve was great at managing the clients. Steve had an incredible relationship with Joel Wayne. He had a great relationship with Spielberg and people like that, and it was very important for him. He liked doing that. He liked getting on the phone and kibitzing and talking to people and doing all that kinds of. I wanted to be in the room, the room where it happens. I wanted to be in the room with the editors and just trying to solve problems and stuff. I did not want all of the other stuff because part of what I had gotten, when Viacom took over Paramount, that was when it got real clear that, okay, it's time to go. The first meeting that I had with a bunch of Viacom guys came out from New York, and they sat down and they started going through numbers and all this other stuff. And they said, so we see here that on the Naked Gun, you cut 7 TV spots, but you only ran 4. Why didn't you just cut 4?
That's such a I don't know, accountant's question. You know,
Yes.
like
Well, and that's what happened is the accountants started taking over. And in the prior days, like I said, we were a movie studio. We did things that were required to get things open and to get things to work. And we tried creative solutions, and we had the freedom to do that. And then it became about managing stuff, and it became about headcount.
yeah.
You have 15 people in your department. That's correct. We want you to have 12.
Oh my God.
How am I going to do that?
It was
Well,
Doge
by
before Doge.
firing 3 people. Well, but what about the workload? Not our
Yeah.
problem. We want you to have 12 people. So go fire 3 people. Any 3, we don't care who, just fire 3 people.
Wow.
Well, how is that any way to run anything?
Well, now they're running our government that way. So isn't that
Sure.
exciting?
In the end, I mean, Mike and I always just wanted to be doing the creative stuff.
Mm.
I was very fortunate with Tim when we had Trailer Park that Tim helped run the business and kind of told me, you don't have to worry about this. I'll take care of it. Do the creative stuff. That's all you want to do. You want to get involved in the finances and the billing and all that. So that was a great luxury for me at Trail Park. At Rebel now I have to kind of do all of it. But Mike and I just wanted to be in the room creating. And that I personally I got that from Andy. Andy was the creative force at Kaleidoscope. When I got there, it was like, wow, and as I told you, when we talked about with Skip this morning, the ideas that he would come up with, and it was just, remember Mike, when he would sit at the moviola, his head would be
Yeah.
in on the screen,
Yeah.
and he'd have all these,
Yeah. He would tap things out, and he
he
would,
would
like,
be completely absorbed into the piece.
Wow.
I know that Mike was the same way. We kind of absorbed that energy and that talent and that creativity. I mean, he was incredibly creative, which was inspiring to all of us.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean that was what got you excited. It wasn't the business aspects of it. Andy wasn't a great businessman. I mean, Andy did
No,
very
no.
well for himself, but he wasn't a good businessman. When I finally got into the books, I was like, holy crap, you guys are crazy. Andy liked to spend money on things. Andy liked to have parties. We had a great Christmas party every year at his house, the Mediterranean Fortress up on Hollywood Boulevard, and it was crazy. And he had all these people, and Dick Donner was there, all these filmmakers, and it was just, and he was not, he had lots of private parties and stuff, but the Christmas party was like everybody came, whether you
Yeah.
were a messenger or Steve Panama, you were invited to the Christmas party. And so were all the studio executives, and so were all the filmmakers. And so
And
you were like
stars
walking,
and
yeah,
wow.
you were walking around, and you're sitting down and talking to somebody, and you go, well, that's David Geffen. Or, you're talking to all these people that Andy knows.
Wow.
And he knew everybody. Andy
yeah,
knew everybody, and everybody knew Andy.
and the filmmakers and all the stars really respected him. They respected his talent. That's why we were able also to create some really cool pieces. They trusted him,
Yeah.
So the talent was really something that we all kind of absorbed from him. And he was very respected. Barbara Streisand and Spielberg, everybody really respected. If he had an opinion about something, they would listen.
Yeah.
And he said, no, no, you got to do it this way.
Yeah, you gotta go. And in those days, there was a tremendous amount of respect back and forth because, you know, everybody wasn't meddling. It was like, okay, we're gonna let Andy Kuehn make this trailer, and we're gonna respect what Andy comes up with. We're not gonna nitpick it. We're not gonna crazy cut, overcut it, and do all this stuff. They respected it and they accepted his opinion, and
And
it
also,
was
there was one thing, Mike, one big thing. This, Andy's heyday, really from like the late 70s to the late 80s, I would say. There was no testing. This was before testing, and where people like Joel Wayne just championed the piece all the way through, sold it to the filmmaker, and said, "Fuck it, I love it. It's going on the screen."
yeah,
So it was a very different process, and they
yeah.
trusted Andy with his opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not only was there no testing, there were very few filmmakers.
Yeah.
We very seldom saw filmmakers because filmmakers had no power. You were many of the filmmakers saw their trailers by going to the theater and seeing it, ahead of another movie because you didn't make presentations to filmmakers in those
Yeah, I
days.
mean,
Very
besides,
seldom.
maybe Scorsese,
Yeah,
Spielberg,
yeah.
Oliver Stone,
Only the
the
super
Todd brothers.
powerful
Yeah.
people had that kind of power. Very few others did, and
Mm.
that's when things started to go south. Was as more and more chefs got involved, you know, it becomes hard to maintain the purity of the idea. So many of what was done, whether it was Andy's idea or whoever had that idea, the germ of this is a great idea, and you execute that idea and you really make it work and you really make it sing. Once people start digging into that and start pulling it apart and trying to make it better or make it work, that you lose the essence of that. One of the things that Bill Cox used to say when he was teaching us editing was, when we would finish the first cut, he would say, "This is ours. This is our cut. After this, when we send it out, it becomes everybody else's and we lose control over it. We just become a pair of hands. And you have to learn to accept that."
Yeah.
And we would fight like crazy because, we was like, "No, this is a stupid idea." And, Steve would come back from the meetings and he would say, "Well, this is what they want to do. They want to do this and that." And we'd go, "This is the dumbest idea." And we would scream and yell and kick and curse and, fight. It was like, "No, no, no, they're going to destroy the piece." And then you have to, it's like it's a service business. The
Yeah.
client's going to do. So occasionally we would say, "You know what? We really believe in this. So let's do these two things they suggested. These are not terrible ideas. Let's put these in here. But let's do their version, but then let's do an alternate version that's our version. This
Yeah.
is what we think it should be." Sometimes
Yeah, I was fortunate. I had a few first cuts that survived, that made it maybe like maybe one change, but first cuts were like, oh God, yeah.
yeah, and in those days there were very often, first cuts, second cuts that went to finish.
Mm.
Yeah.
Because if you had sat with the client, if you had had a lot of conversations about it, if you were really clear on what they were looking for, they trusted what you created, and they would look at it and they say, "Yeah, that's what we talked about. That's great. We love that. We don't like this shot because it's kind of a ratty shot, and we don't like this actor. Can you sort of tone that down a little bit? Make those changes, go to version two, and then version two goes to finish." And that
Yeah.
was it. You were done. There was no 40,
Yeah.
50, 60 versions. There were no, you didn't cut 100 spots. You cut 4 or 5 spots and then you revised them.
Yeah. So,
People,
Mike, we definitely have to bring you back. If for no other reason, I could spend an hour just talking about the AI teaser. Spew that.
I can
So,
tell you there's I heard your conversation, with about that,
yeah.
but you don't know the whole story.
So this is a teaser. I learned from my marketing friends. This is a
Yeah,
teaser.
I'll
We're
give you a
definitely
teaser.
having you
Yeah.
back because we
You do
have.
not know the whole story. Your two favorite teasers, Shaft
Oh
and
man, I was
AI.
going to ask you about Shaft, but
You do not know the whole story of either of those, and I will tell you those stories.
okay, we'll do that because Skip talked about it back in 2020, and again, go back June of 2020, go back and listen to that episode. But I know that there's another part of
Yes,
this story.
I've listened to it, and I know what he told you, and I know the things that Skip doesn't know.
Okay, that's
Because
great.
because remember, I was the one who was setting all of that stuff up and who made all of that happen. And I'll tell you the story of how we ended up in New York shooting that stuff with Sam Jackson, because
Okay,
there's a whole story behind that that you don't know.
we got the
The
teaser now. We,
story
we
you
got it
never
all.
That's
heard.
right. It's a story you
The
don't
story
know.
you. Yeah.
So another couple questions for this tribute to Andy. One is just a personal one. What do you miss most about him? It's been just over 21 years actually since he passed. What do you miss most about Andy?
Um, well, you miss that sort of, I guess the thing that I miss, you miss that sense of, of wonder and of the
Mm,
excitement of creating things. So much of what happens nowadays has become industrialized and formulaic. And, I mean, part of why I finally retired was I missed that, the purity of that. The beginnings at Kaleidoscope and the early years of Paramount was fun. I mean, when I started at Kaleidoscope, I made $100 a week. You worked 80 hours a week. So, I made more in overtime than I made in salary.
wow.
You could barely afford to pay your rent. I remember I went to take somebody out to lunch, and I was praying to God that my credit card that I had ordered was going to come before the lunch because I had no money. And the only way I was going to be able to pay for the lunch was if I had a credit card because I had no cash. So it was not easy. And you worked long, long hours. I mean, we'd get two or three films at a time, and you would get all these reels of film, and you would have we'd make two copies of it, and then all those reels had to be coded. So you're talking about 15, 20 reels that have to be put into the coding machine. We'd be there all weekend, 24 hours a day, coding all this film. And then you'd make select reels, and an editor would go through and mark all the selects in the film they wanted and put all that together. But we had fun, you
Mm,
know. Andy made it fun because it was like an adventure. And it was like, how do we solve this problem? And how do we be creative about it? And how do we come up with ideas? And he was very encouraging of all of that. And it made you feel, yeah, it was sort of like a college. You could fail and you weren't gonna get fired by failing. You were gonna get like, hey, you tried it.
yeah,
Tried something different.
that's great.
We'll try it next time. So I miss that sense of the business, and I miss that it came from Andy. He was the core that held all of that together. He was the person that we all sort of gravitated around. And in that little room, in his office, listening to those stories, you were like, I'm in show business. I'm in the movie business. This is great.
Yeah. So one other thing I want to do, Benny knows I was going to do this, but since you're both here together, you both get to play the interviewer with each other. Benny, is there anything important that you want to ask Mike while we have him?
What's a trick question?
Well, listen, I mean, I always, Mike became a very, very good friend of mine, really close, close friends. We spent a lot of times together at work and outside of work. And I always, Mike was, how did you deal with me? I put you through so much hell. How did you not say, I can't deal with this anymore? I mean,
There were a few lonely nights on the boat when you were uh, you were taken away by car. Yeah, it was I I you yeah, we became, Corey, I don't know if we became, it's a friendship that I miss. And, time happens and you have families and kids and you go your separate ways because he's in a school over here and I'm in a school over there. And, you have all new friends and stuff and it becomes a thing. But yeah, we used to spend all of our time together for a very long time. We sailed, we both were into sailing. And so we would rent sailboats and sail to Catalina like every other weekend and stuff. And,
Mhm.
we had great times. It was lots of fun, and I just, I liked being around you because you were fun and you were incredibly creative. You were much as I gravitated to Skip when I went back the second time. I gravitated to you because the creativity that you had just was like with Andy. I like those kinds of people. I like being around people who have really good ideas and stuff. I'm I'm a very good rewriter, re-editor. You know,
Mhm. Yes.
the I can come up with ideas here and there, but I'm not going to come up with the ideas that Benny's going to come up with, that Skip's going to come up with. But I can look at those ideas and I can say, you know what, you did this, it'll be so much better. And I can figure out things, that it's like, and I can keep in mind, I can work both sides of the street with the business and the creative, and I can keep in mind what the overall goal of the studio is, and make sure that that's being addressed, because you have to have a creative piece, but you also have to address, what's the point of this? Well, we're trying to sell this movie.
Yeah.
I've made some really bad trailers that were exactly what was needed in order to
Mm,
sell that movie. I've made some really great trailers that did absolutely nothing. And I've worked on trailers that were like impossible to work on. We can talk about that. Regarding Henry became one of the most famous.
mm.
That we got written up in magazines about this as the example of what not to do in a trailer.
That's
you know
perfect.
and so you ultimately have to service the movie, as Frank Mancuso used to say, and everybody used to repeat it. Our job is to get asses in seats.
Yep.
What I always used to tell the filmmakers when we would have these conversations, when you're dealing with somebody like Mike Nichols, who was a pain in the ass, our job is to get asses in seats. Our job is to bring people to the theater, and we're going to do that however we have to do that, you know, whether we cheat your movie or not. Once we get them into the theater, if you do your job, then you'll keep them there.
Right.
And that's really what it's about. Marketing is only responsible for that first weekend. The first weekend is all about marketing. It's not about the movie. Nobody knows anything about the movie except what they've seen in the marketing. And that's what the first weekend is about. After that, it's
Yeah.
all about word of mouth and it's all about how the film plays. But that first weekend, or in certain circumstances, that first night, which we learn about concert films, they burn themselves out very fast.
Yeah.
But that first weekend is about marketing, and our job is to get people to go to the theater, however we can do that, and then then you have to entertain them to keep them
Yeah.
there.
Mike,
But
do you have any questions for Benny?
how are you? How's your company?
I'm
Why
great.
are you still doing this?
Because I love it. I mean, I love doing it. I love the creative process, and there's a whole new generation. I find myself kind of in Andy's shoes now in some way. There's a whole new generation of editors who are really amazing, young guys. I just hired a guy uh, from Boulder College a little over a year ago now. There's another guy who interned for me who's from Denmark, who's in high school in Denmark. And the stuff they cut is just inspiring to me. So, I have my connections, I have my clients, and then we expanded into home entertainment, social and digital, and it's a whole bunch of other stuff that I haven't done that I'm looking at that is inspiring. And I still cut. I'm still cutting. I cut on all the campaigns that we have. I love doing it. So why stop? I
Yeah.
mean, we have a small shop, so I don't have the burden of trailer park, which was so big, and it's a different experience. But I just love doing it. So, Francois's husband Douglas passed away a couple of years, but
Yeah.
he was shooting in his late 80s, and
Yeah.
he was my inspiration. I talk with him a lot, and I say, why are you still shooting? It's because I love doing it, and
Yeah.
I feel the same way. I got to cut a Beverly Hills Cop trailer for Netflix last year
Yeah.
because they asked me, and if I'd stopped cutting, I wouldn't have had that opportunity. And I
Yeah.
had a blast doing it. I've been cutting trailers for friends of my sisters who have photographers or some. So, as long as you still get the rush out of it, why
Yeah.
stop?
Yeah.
And
Good on you.
I don't have the burden of like, well, I have to cut this thing to make a living.
Right.
Obviously I have editors who work for me, but I can cut stuff and add it to the batch. And funnily enough, sometimes the more traditional, although I still cut pretty crazy cool shit, but are more traditional than my editors, sometimes that goes.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
go, well, the studio tells you to go completely out of the box, and then they put you back in the box.
Yeah.
And a lot of the filmmakers kind of like maybe a little more traditional stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm going to do it because I just love doing it. I still get a rush out of it. And I still, like Andy and you and Steve, after seeing a great cut, walk out of the room kind of skipping, going, wow, fuck, this is good, man. So, I still love it.
You,
Good.
you know
Good
what would be
for you.
cool? I don't know if this could ever be done, but I was just thinking, hearing you talk about the years that you spent together and the different chapters in the history of this industry. If you could cut a piece that you cut segments from every different machine and software that you've cut on over the course of your career, one on a flatbed, one on an Avid, one on a Final Cut, and then piece it all together somehow. It would be because you've worked it like, I don't know, it's representative of the chapters of the history of this industry that you've both been a part of together. So
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Well,
Mike was there when I think I was the one who was fighting the longest to stay on film because I didn't want to cut on tape. And
yeah.
Steve made me an offer. I don't remember if you were there, Mike, for Boomerang. And Steve said to me, I'll pay you, I forgot what it was, like $1,000 a spot or something, if you cut those spots on tape. And I
Yeah.
think I cut like seven. I said, okay, you owe me 7 grand.
that's
And
awesome.
and then the when the Avid came along, Avid was only 2 track, and you couldn't even put a full movie on there.
Yeah. Yeah.
All
I
these
mean,
They were all really, but to Mike's point, what he brought up earlier, when I first started there was a really interesting process that you worked as a team. There was an editor and assistant, and it was a collaboration, and you
yeah.
really learned by watching the guy you worked with.
Yes.
And now kids learn on their own. It's just
Yeah.
Yeah,
completely different.
yeah. The system was great because it was very much a collaboration. You worked with, you as an assistant, you were working with an editor, and so you could trade ideas back and forth, and that's where you started to learn your voice and learn how to speak up and to say, well, what if we tried this? And the editor, whether it was Bill or whoever, would say, uh, well, here's why that won't work. And they would explain it to you. And you go, okay, I get that. I see that. And he said, but let's try this. And he would then come up with a better idea based on what you'd said. And so, you would figure things out and do things like that. Yeah, Benny, I had the unfortunate experience of when I was becoming an editor, and before I started saying, you know what, I don't want to be an editor, I want to produce. But when I was transitioning to being an editor, video was starting to happen. And so they forced me, they said, well, if you want to cut, that's fine, but you can't have a flatbed. We're not going to give you a room with a flatbed. You got to use this brand new Convergence
Oh,
T90 editor to
hated it.
cut on. So I cut a bunch of spots for On Golden Pond, and I cut a bunch of spots for Victor Victoria, and I cut a whole bunch of different stuff on this freaking joystick,
Yeah.
3/4 inch tape deck thing where you could not make a frame accurate, edit. We
No.
talked about, cutting on the frame for 2 frame cuts for Purple Rain. You could not cut on the frame.
No.
So I'd be like, okay, here's the music beat I want to hit, and I'm going to punch there, and it would back up and it would roll and it would hit record and it would be right in the wrong place. And then you'd have to go back and erase the whole thing and start over again. And it was maddening. I just wanted to take a gun and shoot myself.
And every time you made a version, it looked worse and worse. You had to
it went
rebuild
down
it.
a
It
generation
was
of video. So
nightmare.
by the time you were on version 3, it was like digital noise that you couldn't see anything. It was like, where's Henry Fonda? Is he in this spot?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was awful. It was a terrible transition into.
Yeah, that's why I fought it so long. I just say, unfortunately, the Avid came along kind of pretty quickly after
Yeah.
I started cutting on tape. Yeah.
Well, fellas, we could do this all day. I certainly can, but this has been a ton of fun. Mike, thanks so much for joining us. Great to hear your thoughts about that time with Kaleidoscope and your thoughts on Andy. I think, like we were saying before, I think somewhere Andy is smiling upon us. So
Hopefully, I mean, if you go back and look at all the people who went through Kaleidoscope, I mean, to sum up his legacy, I mean, you can look at his work and everything, but look at the people.
The people.
Look at the people who went through Kaleidoscope University and who graduated.
Yeah.
Studio executives, editors, owners of other companies. I mean, people, filmmakers. I mean, people who went through that company learned a lot and learned how to be a professional, in this business, and went on to basically create a whole industry. Because, like I say, when I started there, it was like, what's the trailer business? Nobody knew what the trailer business was. Nobody even knew that companies like that existed. I would tell people where I got a job, and they were like, what do you do?
They still do that.
Now trailer companies are all over the internet. Everybody knows about trailers. Everybody knows, and there's trailer awards and there's all this other stuff. And people know about trailers. Everybody, when a trailer goes online, it's like, we got 5 million hits in the first 20 seconds, and all this craziness. It's a huge industry. And it was Andy and all of the people that he trained and that came after him that really built that into an industry and really, seeded a lot of the studio side of it and seeded all these companies and stuff. There's if you do a couple of 6 degrees, you can pretty much trace everybody, make a connection that goes back to Andy.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's a legacy.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, thanks again for doing this, Mike. Good to see you again, Benny. You guys are terrific.
yeah.
Good to see both of you guys.
And thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. As always, please rate us, review us, wherever you get your podcast. Really, write the review. Especially on Apple Podcasts, it really does help. Helps us in the rankings so other folks who love trailers and love this whole art form in this industry can learn about these conversations and join in on the fun. Follow us on all the socials. I am at Corey S. Nathan. That's at Corey, S as in Sam, Nathan. And remember to check out our awesome sponsors, 2496 Sound and Music Design, the Golden Trailer Awards, and Soundstripe. Really grateful to all those folks for helping us keep the lights on. Thanks again for joining us. Now, go do some inspired work.